My English name is Rande Cook. I'm a hereditary chief of the Montaguila tribe within the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation, which is the northern tip of Vancouver Island. My chief's name is Makwala, which means moon. I was born and raised in Alert Bay, beautiful small island on the northeastern side of Vancouver Island, rich with artists and culture and language. Grew up with two amazing grandparents who were very cultural, who did everything they possibly could to, hang on to their teachings and values and make sure that they're passed on to myself and a lot of our other family. My grandfather, who was a chief, was also an artist, and I think that's where some of my first passion came from. We would sit around drawing at the kitchen table, and it wasn't even about the drawing for me. It was just time with him. I remember I would just every day wanted to be around my grandfather. He was like my absolute hero. And I remember just as a little kid looking up at him, thinking he was like the greatest, strongest man in the world. And I remember going to school, constantly sharing stories with friends, like how great my grandfather was. But it was interesting because I was always an artist, I felt. I always felt like it was already in me. I remember, I don't think there's a memory I have of me actually picking up a pencil or anything like that, because I already had one. I was already doing it for so long. And I feel I was already observing the world through my art at a very, very early age. And I remember sitting with my grandfather, asking him specifically to teach me to draw some of our art forms. And he denied me. He just said, no. He's like, go down the dock, draw the boats, go sit on a beach, draw birds. It wasn't until years later where I started to realize what he was doing was opening me up to see the world in many different ways, and not to only look at it through an Indigenous lens. It opened up that much more, where I was able to fuse and look at the world through many different lenses. And it allowed me to be Indigenous, but it also allowed me to be free. It allowed me to explore and push boundaries and push the limits, where I think it was the greatest gift I ever received from anybody in my entire art practice or career, was having a grandfather who, opened up that much more for me at such an early age without me even recognizing it. So it really does play a huge factor in who I am today and the work that I create. And as you may know and see, my work is very contemporary. And I think with the teachings also from my grandparents, they were always, teaching me about, our culture. It's important for us to be connected to our culture, and more importantly, connected to our land. Make sure you're connecting with your land and your resources and knowing where you come from, and protect them. Go and protect the land, because by doing that, you're protecting your culture, your people, and your future. And it's those teachings that allowed me to develop confidence in everything that I was doing, where I didn't have to question anymore if I was doing something right. It was already embedded in the conversation. It was already instilled through their actions, through their love, through their compassion, and their ability to allow me to just be me.
What I find interesting about the work is I see the two large pieces behind me, and that they are more traditional in their character. And then the female figure beyond the mask, I find that intriguing because they're so different. So could you speak a little bit to that, going from the very traditional to the very contemporary?
I started very contemporary. I feel within my own practice, like I say, going back to my grandfather, if you could be in my bedroom when I was 11 years old and to see my walls, my bedroom and the drawings that I tacked up.
Mm.
They were all of like portraits and, like hands and like figurative work, and then drawing like boats and, like I say, like birds and just all of that.
Mhm.
And then I started to integrate our elements after. And that's what my grandfather had taught me, where he was like, no, study the outline of things first. Make a salmon look like a salmon, and then you add the elements. So it wasn't starting where I've been with peers where, other artists where they start with the ovoid. So when I was graduating and I did an apprenticeship, I worked with John Livingston, and he was a traditionally trained. He immediately recognized I had talent. He was like, I want you to work with me because he's like, you're way more advanced than anybody else I'd seen. He was like, wow, you draw so fast. I would sit down literally in minutes and just be drawing things out without sketching, without thinking, but it's because I was doing it for so long. But it was really fascinating at that time because he was looking at art a lot differently by watching me draw, and the way I would take something in real time and indigenize it. I was very in the moment. And I think it gave him some freedom too, to be able to be like, whoa, as a mentor, even, I think there was some reciprocity there where I think I was also helping him to explore some things too, because he started using more color after a while too. And that was kind of fun where, I was like, oh, I would like to think I do have some influence too. There's art for the market. There's art like for the galleries. There's art for traditional purposes, like, ceremonial. So I remember making a decision early in my life that I would never cross the boundary between ceremonial objects and commercial. And I thought, I'm definitely going to keep everything that is sacred, sacred. And before I even like picked up my very first knife, I made that choice. I said, I will not carve these ceremonial objects for commercial space. So I carved specific masks for my family for potlatches that have never been seen, not even on social media. Like I carved them, I wrapped them up. They're only seen in potlatches. And then for the commercial market, I pushed myself really early to be more contemporary. And I pushed in a way where I remember very specifically getting kicked out of galleries because I wasn't traditional enough in Vancouver. And I thought, well, geez, that's pretty interesting when a gallery can dictate that. And I thought, I don't really feel that's how it should be. So I kept doing my thing. And sure enough, people like Lee Brooks were one of the first ones who was like, I really like this. It's different. It's fresh. It's cool, and and it's good. Like, and I was like, thanks. And he was one of the first ones who gave me a solo show and changed everything from there, because an entire audience was exposed to my work that was completely me and authentic and new, and it helped me to open many, many doors from that moment forward, just by trusting. And the entire show sold out, and it was a really beautiful experience for me. But it also allowed me the freedom to not replicate again. Like I always feel like if I've done it, I've done it. Like I want to be growing all the time, and still push myself. And that's what pushes me through the work that you have. So looking at some of the carvings and the early carvings, like the salmon behind you, the silhouettes are there, making sure, there's movement and flow, like salmon swim together. Or even looking to over your other shoulder, you have the double-headed serpent, the Sisiuth. And it's the yin and yang. It's the balance. It's always placed over doorways. So when you're coming and going, it balances out the negative and the positive and just creates neutral space.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a protector in that way.
Oh,
Yeah, so even the panel behind you,
yeah.
it's not as very traditional. There's no black. I mean, there's navy blue, I think, from what I remember. And again, the style of it, it just allowed me to kind of, move from there. But as I started to explore, I started to go back when I was thinking about my early drawings and where I wanted to be as an artist, I thought, okay, I'm doing things for the commercial market. And I know the galleries in Vancouver and, certain places want the art to look like a very specific, and I do have to pay my bills. Sometimes you get caught in doing things where, I have children. So I was like, okay. But what I started to do was, and is I would carve a piece for a gallery, for market, and then I would bank a piece. And what I started to do is I was banking all of the works that I wanted to do until I got to enough work where then I did an art show. And then I would do an art show that I consigned the whole show, the whole thing was done. And that was my way of understanding the business side of it, where I was like, there's value in this body of work because it's where I want to be. It's where I want to be going. So I'm going to invest in myself. So I use the commercial market to pay my bills and do the things that they wanted. And then I would bank that one special piece that was different. And I started to explore the figurative, the female body again. I started to go back to my early Renaissance drawings. I started to think about a lot of European influence. I started to think about fusion, and I started to think about peace and how bringing all of these elements together creates harmony because it's accessible. And what I'm wanting to constantly push and create are stories that connect with everybody in this time that we're in now. The stories that we have that are legends and origin stories, and like I say, ceremonial objects, belong to us specifically through our culture. I want to create art that connects with people today. I want to talk about emotion. I want to talk about, compassion and having empathy, and how we can make the world a better place. And I can use my art form to bring cultures together so we can celebrate diversity. And that's where I've been heavily focused for a long time, is how do I make art where people look at it and they're not thinking about, oh, this is an Indigenous story from here. I want them to not even think of that at all. I want them to go, whoa, I resonate with this because it makes me feel something. And they get to share their story in that moment. And that for me, it makes me feel like I've achieved something. Like I feel like I'm on my path to success because now I'm bringing people closer to their own emotions, closer to their own identity, to who they are, and that they can recognize themselves in something that is Indigenous, but maybe not, So, and I feel like by bridging cultures and bridging humanity in many different ways, art can actually serve as a tool for peace in a lot of different ways. I love how artists express themselves. So I looked at masks, specifically Kwakwaka'wakw masks, in different ways, because every artist from every tribe has their own unique style. But when I was looking at the objects, though, one thing that was really clear to me, I was like, there's nothing here that talks about the information of this mask, not the story, the really deep, deep information. And when I talk about that, it's really about the process, it's rituals. And our rituals are very specific because we send children into the forest as they're being initiated into societies. And through this initiation, they fast and they bathe in glacier water. And in between, they meditate. And through meditation, you're striving and reaching higher consciousness. And once you're in that higher consciousness state of mind, you start tapping into the vibrations and sounds of plants and animals. And you feel the vibration and language of plants and trees. And through that, there's an exchange where the trees start to inform you through song, and they start to inform dances. And then through that, then you can also strive towards astral projection and seeing the world in a completely different way. And it's very, very profound. But what each mask represents in that is the ability to connect with those ancient forests. We need a healthy living ecosystem. So I'm going to make masks, a series of masks where I went into the forest and I started taking MIDI connectors and connecting them to plants and I was recording the sounds and the vibrations coming from the plants and the trees. So I recorded them and I brought it back into my studio and I carved a mask and I made a mold. And from the mold, I put it on these vibration sensors and I started to pour the epoxy and I channeled the sound vibration of the plants through the mold. And as the mold was hardening, the sound vibrations hardened within it. So each mask is harnessed by the sound vibrations of a spruce tree or a hemlock tree or a cedar tree or plants. And that was the way I thought, this is how I can start to bring the information back into each mask so people will understand what these ancient masks were meant to represent. We have a responsibility to also live at our highest frequency as human beings and not to be so colonized, like to get out of that and allow ourselves to reach our fullest potential as human beings and to know we can still feel those vibrations. We can still feel Mother Earth in that way if we allow ourselves to. So I think, you know, if there's a transition where us as Indigenous people can create some of these conversations, but also create pathways towards each other where we can share in these values and truly reconcile and just be human and remember what it means to be human, then I feel things will be better. That it's not about race. It's not about anything other than just who we are and celebrating life. It's the essence of life, and we can't do that without a healthy planet. So all of my work in my journey as an artist, from studying early, teachings from my grandfather, have always been about that. It's been really about just kindness. It's a responsibility to be kind, and it's about being accountable for your actions, you know? And like I say, I was lucky to be filled with love. And it was that love that gave me that. And it helped me to explore and push boundaries to, you know, study in different ways and see the world in different ways and to create art in different ways, you know, because I've never wanted to actually be the same as anybody else. I've always had an attitude where I'm like, I want people to go in a gallery and know that that's my work. I don't want them to go and try and figure out who's who. I'm like, no, I want to be me.
Randy, thank you so much for your participation and for your willingness to speak today. And I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.